Welcome, beloved anointed ones. Let them feel it. Every ounce of the doubt they carried, every whispered judgment, every secret calculation, let them feel it now. This is the moment many of them never saw coming. You were not exaggerating, you were not playing a role. Every claim you made about your path, every declaration of who you were, every time you stood quietly while they laughed, mocked or dismissed you, it was all truth wrapped in patience. The harsh reality is this: people who underestimate the chosen ones rarely recover gracefully. A study on perception versus reality shows that when someone is confronted with evidence that completely contradicts their long-held assumptions, their humiliation can trigger psychological stress equivalent to minor trauma. In other words, the ones who doubted you are now paying the emotional price for being wrong, and you do not even have to lift a finger. Here is the brilliance in all of this. While they fumbled with their assumptions, envied in silence, or attempted to undermine you behind closed doors, you were quietly building a foundation they could not even see. They laughed at your claims, not realizing that your words were not declarations to impress them. They were declarations that would eventually leave them speechless. You became a walking paradox to them, familiar yet unknowable, visible yet untouchable. Someone they thought they could read but could not even comprehend. And now, as your reality unfolds exactly as you said it would, every smirk they carried, every eye roll they delivered, every haughty judgment is slowly curdling into pure, undeniable humiliation. It is almost poetic, really, watching someone who tried to write your story suddenly discover they were not even in the author's seat. They thought they were critics, but they were only spectators to a truth they refused to acknowledge. And there is a little humor in it too, imagining the faces, the internal groans, the mental notes they take while realizing that the small claim you made years ago is now the undeniable headline of your life. But this is not just about them. It is about the power of consistency, the subtle mastery of being exactly who you claim to be, and the quiet joy that comes from knowing that truth, patience, and vision never need validation from those who doubted it. The irony is thick, the suspense unrelenting, and the satisfaction deliciously unavoidable. Number 1. They finally realize your confidence was not arrogance. It was accurate self-measurement. For years, they judged your confidence as if it were a flaw, labeling it arrogance or ego. They did not understand that what they saw as boldness was actually a quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth and abilities. Every time you spoke, moved, or acted with certainty, they felt challenged. Not because you were threatening them, but because their own insecurities could not process someone operating from clarity rather than neediness. They mistook self-awareness for self-importance. And in doing so, they built a narrative about you that was never true. Now that reality has caught up, the truth hits them like a shockwave. Your confidence was not fabricated to impress anyone or to put them in their place. It was rooted in precise self-measurement, a recognition of your skills, your limits, and your destiny. They see you standing where you always said you would, achieving what you always claimed you could, and it humiliates them because they were wrong about you in the most fundamental way. They spent time projecting their doubts onto you, thinking they were reading your character, but the reflection they were seeing was their own fear. What makes it even more excruciating for them is that they cannot argue with reality. They cannot rewrite history or diminish your achievements. Every step you took quietly while they mocked, every plan executed with discipline while they laughed, every boundary you set while they assumed weakness now becomes undeniable evidence. They begin to realize that your confidence never needed validation because it was never about them. Their humiliation is a mirror of their own failures, the inability to measure themselves accurately, the failure to recognize true strength when it walks in front of them. Meanwhile, You have been operating on a level of self-awareness that they cannot reach, and their discomfort is not about your arrogance. It is about the uncomfortable truth that they misjudged someone who was never pretending. Their embarrassment is inevitable, and the satisfaction of knowing it is completely natural. You were right all along, and they are finally forced to acknowledge it, not with applause, but with silent, bitter recognition that their assumptions were not just incorrect. They were humiliatingly far from the truth. Number 2, their biggest mistake was assuming your delay meant you were pretending. They watched you move at your own pace and interpreted it as hesitation, doubt, or even fabrication. They assumed that because you were not rushing to prove yourself, you must have been pretending to be someone you were not. They judged every pause, every moment of quiet as weakness or indecision, and in doing so, they underestimated the power of your timing. They did not understand that some people operate according to a clock. Others cannot read. Every delay, every period of observation, every silent move was strategic. A layering of preparation that they were blind to. Now the irony is unbearable for them. That delay they mocked was never a pause. It was preparation. While they rushed, doubted, and judged, you were quietly building, learning, testing, and strengthening every part of yourself that needed to be unshakable. Your patience was not passivity. It was a deliberate calibration that allowed you to act when the moment was right, with precision and impact they could not anticipate. They feel humiliated because they mistook stillness for falseness, and the results now confront them with the undeniable truth. Their embarrassment is compounded by the fact that they were convinced they were ahead, that they had the advantage because they acted first, spoke first, or tried to claim influence before you did. Every assumption they made about your delay now feels foolish. The reality is they mistook your silence for emptiness, not realizing that the quietest moments often contain the most power. They see now that while they were busy making judgments and plotting interference, you were constructing a life, a reputation, and a presence that could not be shaken by their skepticism or ridicule. The worst part for them is recognizing that their timing and impatience never gave them an advantage. You were not pretending, you were exact, deliberate, and unstoppable. Their humiliation is not about anything you did wrong. It is about the magnitude of their miscalculation. They assumed your delay meant you were small, weak, or fake. The truth is, your timing was always perfect. And now, in the aftermath of their misjudgment, the weight of that realization sits heavily on them, while you stand as evidence that patience, clarity, and self-awareness always triumph over their shallow assumptions. Number 3, they laughed when you declared your destiny, but did not realize you were declaring their future apology. They heard you speak about your goals, your path, and your vision, and they laughed. They whispered behind your back, assumed you were exaggerating, and treated your declarations as entertainment rather than truth. They could not see that what you were doing was not just talking about yourself. You were setting the stage quietly for a reality they would one day have to reckon with. Every word they dismissed was a seed of undeniable proof, and every laugh they shared was a contract they unknowingly signed to eventually admit they were wrong. The humiliation they feel now comes not from your success alone, but from the irony of it. They mocked your claims without realizing that the life you described was not just a personal goal. It was a roadmap that would eventually force them to recognize the truth they ignored. They never imagined that the person they assumed was overreaching or naive would actually become the person they once doubted. And worse for them, the success did not just validate you. It invalidated their disbelief, exposing their judgment, their envy, and their short-sightedness. They feel embarrassed because they now understand that the apologies they might offer one day are not about you. They are about themselves, about the times they laughed, doubted, and underestimated you. Your destiny was not a challenge to them. It was a mirror reflecting how poorly they handled someone operating from integrity and vision. They assumed they were in control of the narrative, but it turns out that their role was smaller than they ever imagined. Their criticism irrelevant, their laughter meaningless. The satisfaction for you comes from watching this unfold naturally. You did not need to respond, prove or retaliate. You simply moved forward, built quietly, and let life itself serve as the undeniable evidence of your words. They will now have to confront a truth that cannot be ignored. What they once laughed at is now undeniable, and their eventual recognition, whether they admit it or not, will carry the bitter weight of knowing they were wrong. Your declarations were not for them, but the impact of ignoring them will be a lesson they will not forget. Number 4. They thought they could outgrow you, only to realize you were the standard they could never reach. They treated distance like a ladder, believing all they had to do was climb far enough away from your presence to claim superiority. They acted as if proximity to you was the only thing keeping them from becoming greater. But here is where the truth blindsides them. They did not rise by walking away. They simply removed themselves from the very environment that was elevating them. Your presence was not competition. It was calibration. Being around you forced them to confront their weaknesses, sharpen their character, and elevate their work ethic. Without you as a silent reference point, their growth stalled. They thought removing you from the picture meant removing accountability, only to discover it removed their direction. They tried to outperform someone who had never been in the race with them. They were not trying to surpass your achievements. They were trying to outrun the discomfort of knowing you had something they could not fake. Authenticity, depth, and inner truth. As you continued evolving, they faced the shocking reality that the distance they created did nothing but highlight how stagnated they truly were. Every year, every milestone, every elevation you walked into made their decision look more foolish. They call it outgrowing you, but what they were really doing was shrinking away from their own inadequacies. Their pride made them believe they were expanding, but your growth exposed that they were only stretching the illusion, not the truth. Now the humiliation settles in. The person they once tried to downplay has become someone they secretly study. The one they assumed they could surpass effortlessly is now standing on a level they cannot touch. No matter how much they mimic, compete, or pretend, and the sting is deeper because you never chased them, compared yourself, or tried to keep them close. You just lived, grew, and aligned with who you were meant to be. Their embarrassment comes from realizing that they did not outgrow you. They outgrew their ability to hide the envy they hoped you would never notice. And now, the very guidance they once dismissed from you has become the direction they desperately need, but are too ashamed to request. Number 5. Their humiliation comes from understanding they did not misjudge you, they misjudged themselves. They misjudged themselves. The crushing reality for them is not that they got you wrong. It is that they got themselves wrong for years. They walked around with an inflated sense of their own abilities, believing they were smarter, faster, stronger, or more capable than everyone in their path. You were not even part of the equation in their self-assessment. They simply assumed their own measures of success and influence were untouchable. Watching you step into your power shatters that illusion. Every confident move you make, every milestone you reach, and every calm assurance you carry forces them to confront a truth they were not prepared to face. The version of themselves they thought existed is imaginary. They see now that they were not measuring you. They were measuring their own ego against an imagined standard. Their misjudgment was not about underestimating you. It was about overestimating themselves. And that realization is brutal, because it comes with no excuses, no shortcuts, no room for denial. The person they assumed they could quietly surpass or control has become a mirror reflecting all the gaps they refuse to acknowledge. Their humiliation is not rooted in envy alone. It is rooted in the recognition that they were never as untouchable as they believed. What intensifies the embarrassment is that it is not just a one-time shock. Every time they witness your growth, your consistency, or your calm authority, they are reminded of the truth they have been avoiding. They can no longer rely on their old narratives to protect their ego. Their confidence in themselves erodes because it was never grounded in truth. It was grounded in fear of being less than what they projected, and the sting of it all is subtle but relentless. They realized they were not superior. They were not in control, and their judgment was flawed from the start. They were not wrong about you. They were wrong about their own place in the world. That is the part that breaks them quietly and completely. The truth that they underestimated your power while overestimating their own. And that miscalculation leaves a mark far deeper than any confrontation ever could. Number 6. They are embarrassed because you did not become who you said you would be. You were already that person in disguise. The humiliation they feel is not because you suddenly achieved something new. It is because they finally see what was always there. They assumed your claims, your quiet confidence, and your vision were aspirational. That you were talking about a person you were trying to become. They did not understand that your greatness did not require a timeline, approval, or external validation. It already existed within you. All you have done is lift the veil, reveal the layers, and move with clarity that they could not perceive before. They are embarrassed because their own vision of reality was so limited. They expected growth to look like struggle, chaos, or visible effort. They assumed transformation was linear, noisy, and dramatic. What they were not ready for was someone quietly powerful, someone whose evolution does not shout, but simply exists undeniable in its presence. Your unveiling was not about proving them wrong. It was about living authentically in a way they could not process. Their perception was never equipped to see what you were capable of. Their humiliation comes from realizing their own intellectual and spiritual limits. Every step you take now confirms what they assumed was impossible. They thought that if your life matched your words, it would take time, visible effort, or struggle. Instead, your life aligns effortlessly with what you always claimed because your alignment was not a goal. It was a truth. They feel foolish, not because you changed, but because their judgment was based on their inability to see the depth, discipline, and consistency that existed in you all along. What hurts them most is that they thought they could time you, pace you, or measure your progress. And now they see that none of that matters. You did not grow into yourself. You were always that person. Your presence, your choices, and your results are not a performance. They are a revelation, and the embarrassment they feel is the quiet, bitter recognition that for all their observation, all their criticism, and all their assumptions, they were simply not equipped to recognize the truth they now cannot deny. Number 7. What humiliates them most is realizing you never competed with them. They were competing with their projection of you. The real sting for them is not that you succeeded. It is that they were racing against a version of you that never existed. All along they assumed you were in some invisible competition with them. That every step you took was a challenge, that every achievement was meant to prove them wrong. What they failed to recognize is that you were never concerned with their position, their pace, or their approval. Their competition was entirely self-created, born from their insecurities, jealousy, and constant need to measure themselves against someone they misunderstood. They built imaginary races in their minds, setting benchmarks based on your potential rather than your reality. They assumed your life, your words, and your actions were about them, as if every choice you made was meant to either intimidate or impress. Meanwhile, you were doing none of that. You were not racing anyone. You were building quietly, healing wounds they did not know existed, learning lessons they would not survive, and evolving in ways that did not require their acknowledgement. Every victory of yours existed independent of their perception, and that independence is exactly what humiliates them now. The irony is sharp. They have been sprinting, scrambling, and strategizing to win a race you did not even enter. They exhausted themselves trying to surpass an idea of you, chasing shadows that were only as real as their projections. Meanwhile, your progress was deliberate, grounded, and effortless in comparison. Not because you had an advantage, but because your energy was not wasted on imagined rivalries. Now, as they watch your reality unfold, embarrassment sets in. They realize the person they tried to outpace was never competing, never measuring, never worried about them. They were distracted, exhausted, and deceived by the story they told themselves about you. The bitter truth hits: their jealousy, their comparisons, their mental competitions, all of it was meaningless. They were not racing you. They were racing a reflection of their own insecurity, and that revelation is almost unbearable. Their humiliation lies not in what you did, but in what they assumed. And finally, seeing the difference is a quiet, devastating blow they cannot ignore. Number 8, they finally understand you did not exaggerate your pain. You understated it. For years they looked at your calm and composed exterior and assumed your challenges were minor, that the trials you faced were either exaggerated or somehow manageable with ease. They could not grasp that the strength they saw was forged in storms far harsher than they could imagine. Your composure was mistaken for simplicity, your confidence misread as invulnerability. Every time they dismissed your struggles, they underestimated the magnitude of what you quietly endured. Now the truth has a weight they cannot ignore. Life itself is exposing the depth of your journey, revealing the battles you fought without complaint, the sacrifices you made without announcing them, and the resilience you carried when every part of you wanted to break. They are humiliated because they assumed your survival meant your struggles were small, when in reality, your calmness was the proof of something far greater, a strength that thrives despite adversity, not because of its absence. The embarrassment comes from realizing they judged by appearances. They mistook patience for passivity, endurance for ease, and quiet determination for lack of challenge. They assumed that if someone could remain composed under pressure, the pressure itself must have been minimal. They were wrong. Your life has now become undeniable evidence that storms do not always announce themselves loudly, and that surviving them with integrity is a power they could never measure. What compounds their humiliation is that they did not just misread your pain, they projected their assumptions onto it. They thought you were exaggerating, embellishing, or performing suffering for effect. The reality is that your pain was real, profound, and often understated because you were not seeking sympathy. You were seeking growth. Their judgment, once confident, now feels naive and short-sighted. They are forced to confront a humbling truth. Your calm was never weakness, and your survival was never simple. You did not just endure, you transcended. And that revelation leaves them speechless, uncomfortable, and undeniably aware of how little they truly understood you. Number 9, their humiliation comes from witnessing you thrive in spaces they thought would break you. They were convinced that certain environments would swallow you whole. They believed the pressure, the chaos, the responsibility, or the loneliness of those spaces would eventually crush you. Some of them secretly waited for cracks to show, for you to fold the way they would have, for you to struggle the way they did, for you to prove them right by failing in a space they considered too much for someone like you. But the opposite happened. Instead of breaking, you expanded. Instead of shrinking, you adapted. Instead of losing yourself, you found deeper layers of your purpose. Their humiliation comes from witnessing a truth they never wanted to admit. The environment was never the determining factor. You were. They underestimated your ability to thrive in conditions that destroy others. They assumed the room would overpower you, not realizing that some people are built with a presence that steadies the entire atmosphere. You did not just survive those spaces, you evolved in them. You turned pressure into clarity, obstacles into training, and isolation into inner mastery. Every day you stood firm was a direct challenge to everything they believed about you. What embarrasses them even more is that they now see how wrong their assumptions were. They thought a difficult environment would expose your weaknesses, but it ended up exposing theirs. They projected their own fears and limitations onto you, believing you would drown where they could not swim. Instead, you rose, not because the environment favored you, but because you carry a capacity they never recognized. The same conditions that intimidate others became the very conditions that revealed your strength. They cannot deny it anymore. They thought the room would define you, but now they see the truth. Your presence is what transforms the room. Your growth forces them to confront the limits of their perspective and the smallness of their expectations. You did not win despite the environment. You became undeniable because of it. And every step you take forward is a reminder that the power they doubted was real all along. And the doubt they held says more about them than it ever did about you. Number 10. They now know you were not trying to impress them. You were trying to warn them. People who lack spiritual depth always misinterpret spiritual clarity as arrogance. When you spoke, you were not boasting. You were broadcasting. You were not pontificating. You were predicting. But because their ego was louder than their discernment, they filtered your divine insight through their insecurity and labeled it bragging. Now the shock is kicking in. They realize you were not trying to prove anything. You were simply articulating what you sensed, what you foresaw, what you were assigned to say. Your intuition was the early alarm clock they kept hitting snooze on. Your warnings were God's gentle intervention wrapped in your voice. Your visions were glimpses of future events they were too spiritually asleep to recognize. And here is the twist that stings them the most. Everything you said is unfolding. Everything you predicted is materializing. Everything you tried to shield them from is now standing at their door. Now they are embarrassed because they finally understand you were not speaking from ego. You were speaking from experience, from discernment, from divine connection. They accused you of overthinking when in reality you were overseeing. They accused you of being dramatic when in truth you were being accurate. They thought you were trying to elevate yourself when you were simply trying to elevate their awareness. And the humiliation hits harder, because now they see what you were trying to prevent. You were not trying to impress them. You were trying to prepare them, but they could not receive the message because they rejected the messenger. Number 11. They feel ashamed because you built yourself without the validation they withheld. They assumed that by withholding recognition, approval, or support, they could stunt your growth. They believed that their praise was a currency, a tool to control, measure, or manipulate your progress. Every time they ignored your achievements, dismissed your ideas, or minimized your victories, they thought they were setting the limits of what you could become. They assumed your success was somehow dependent on their acknowledgement. Now the reality is inescapable for them. It was not. You built yourself anyway. You did not wait for permission, applause, or validation to move forward. You did not require them to endorse your vision, approve your decisions, or confirm your worth. Your independence became proof that their strategies were useless against someone who measured themselves by truth, not by external approval. The very tools they thought could control you ended up highlighting their own inadequacy. The shame hits them hardest when they realize how emotionally dependent they were on feeling superior. Their silence, their dismissal, their attempts to manipulate the narrative. All of it now looks foolish because your growth was never contingent on them. They thought depriving you of acknowledgement would weaken you, but it only revealed their own weakness. The need to feel in control, to dominate, to validate their self-worth by diminishing yours. You did not just survive without their approval. you flourished. And that flourish is a mirror reflecting how fragile their ego truly was. Their embarrassment is not about what you did. It is about what they failed to do. They tried to hold power over someone who did not need it. They withheld support, hoping it would matter, and in the end, it did not. Your independence is not just a victory. It is a revelation of their limitations, a silent statement that their judgment, manipulation, and pride were never the barriers they believed them to be. Now they are left with nothing but the uncomfortable recognition that your rise was never in their hands. And their shame is the natural consequence of trying to weaponize validation against someone who never needed it. Number 12. They did not believe you because they never imagined someone they knew could carry a destiny that large. It was about the limits of their own imagination. They could not process the idea that someone they grew up with, worked beside, or casually interacted with could carry a calling that stretched beyond the boundaries of what they considered normal. Familiarity made them underestimate you. They convinced themselves they understood your capacity because they knew your past, your upbringing, your mistakes, and your vulnerabilities. In their mind, someone destined for greatness had to come from somewhere far away, mysterious, unreachable, not from their circle, not from their environment, and certainly not from someone they once looked down on or felt equal to. Their humiliation now comes from realizing that their disbelief was not a reflection of your identity. It was an exposure of their worldview. The destiny you carry did not require their understanding. It revealed the smallness of their expectations. They assumed that because they had access to you, your calling must be common. They thought proximity meant superiority. They believed familiarity granted them authority to define your limits. And now, seeing how far you have risen, how effortlessly you have stepped into a path they could not have dreamt for themselves, they are confronted with the truth. They were never qualified to measure you. Your evolution did not shock you. It confirmed what you always sensed. But for them, it shattered an illusion. They were not humbled by your success. They were humbled by their own blindness. It is embarrassing to realize that what they dismissed as ambition was actually destiny. It is painful to recognize that the person they overlooked was carrying a magnitude they could not comprehend. Now they understand that the disbelief they held was not about you being too ordinary. It was about their worldview being too small. They were never doubting who you are. They were doubting what was possible, and your rise forced them to confront the truth that their limitations were never yours to inherit. Number 13. They are shocked because you did not just become who you said you were. You became someone they never believed could exist. Your evolution did not simply confirm your potential. It rewrote the entire blueprint of what they thought a person like you could become. They expected you to grow, but only within the confines of their imagination. They thought your rise would be modest, predictable, manageable. What they never prepared for was the possibility that you would outgrow even your own early definitions, expanding into a version of yourself that feels almost unreal to them. You did not just fulfill the prophecy, you stretched it beyond their mental capacity. Everything they assumed about your limits has now been proven shallow. They believed you would improve a little but not transform entirely. They thought you would gain confidence but not authority. They thought you would find clarity but not mastery. They thought you would discover purpose but not embody destiny, and this underestimation was not accidental. It was rooted in their comfort. Your smallness made them feel safe, superior, relevant. Now that you have become someone they never imagined could exist, their humiliation is unavoidable. Your growth did not embarrass them because it was loud. It embarrassed them because it was undeniable. There is no excuse they can lean on, no story that can explain away your transformation, no justification for why they did not believe you when you tried to tell them who you were becoming. Their shame is the realization that their disbelief was not based on logic. It was based on insecurity. Your life now exposes how low their expectations truly were. They did not misjudge your potential. They misjudged reality. You were never evolving to prove them wrong. You were evolving because that is who you were built to be. And now, seeing the fullness of who you have become, they are stunned into silence, forced to confront the fact that the person they underestimated grew into a presence they once believed was impossible. Their shock is really just grief for the version of you they invented. The smaller, dimmer, safer version they needed you to be. But you outgrew their imagination, and now they must live with the truth. You did not just become who you said you were. You became someone their minds were never equipped to fathom. Number 14. Their humiliation is the receipt of every thought they had about you, that they would never admit out loud. It is coming from the secret archive in their own mind. They are being confronted by thoughts they assumed would stay hidden forever. The quiet underestimations, the silent eye rolls, the private judgments they dressed as concern, the inner smirks when you talked about your dreams, the casual disbelief they disguised behind polite smiles. They never said these things openly because even they knew how petty it sounded. So they kept those thoughts tucked away like loose change, believing they would never matter. But now your elevation has turned those hidden thoughts into a receipt, detailed, undeniable, and stamped with reality. Every doubt they had is now illuminated, not because you exposed them, but because life did. Success has a way of spotlighting silence. Your growth held up a mirror they did not want to look into, showing them how small they once made you in their imagination. It is not your winning that humiliates them. It is the memory of how confidently they misread you. They are replaying all the moments they mentally wrote you off, all the times they assumed you did not have what it took, all the private satisfaction they felt when they thought you were stuck. They are remembering every thought they entertained out of jealousy, insecurity, or quiet arrogance. And now those same thoughts feel like evidence against them. You did not embarrass them, their own mindset did. They are realizing their judgment of you was not based on truth. It was based on how they felt about themselves. They doubted your abilities because they doubted their own. They dismissed your potential because they were threatened by it. They hoped you would not rise because your rise would expose everything they failed to become. Now they are sitting with the discomfort of knowing they rooted against someone who was never competing with them. Someone who stayed kind. Someone who kept going. Someone who became everything they silently believed you could not. Their humiliation is simply the invoice of their own thoughts, finally coming due, and it is a bill only their conscience can pay. Conclusion: the truth is simple yet overwhelmingly powerful. You were never misunderstood, misjudged, or underestimated by chance. Every doubt they carried, every whisper, every secret hope for your failure was a reflection of their own limitations, not yours. From the moment you quietly claimed your purpose, spoke your truth, and moved with unwavering clarity, the path was set. Every act of patience, every layer of strength, every step you took in alignment with your destiny has been a living testament to what it means to be unstoppable. They laughed, they mocked, they doubted, not knowing that your life would one day expose the depth of their misconceptions, the fragility of their assumptions, and the blindness of their disbelief. What they failed to see is that your power never required validation, your greatness never needed applause, and your journey never depended on their understanding. They assumed you were small because they could not comprehend magnitude within reach. They believed distance could weaken you when in reality, it only sharpened your focus. They thought patience was passivity when it was strategy. Every time they underestimated you, they were paying in advance for the shock of realizing the truth. The person they watched, dismissed, or envied quietly became far beyond what they imagined possible. And now the tables have turned. Their humiliation is not your doing, It is the natural consequence of them misjudging reality, of projecting their insecurities onto someone whose life was never theirs to measure. Every whispered doubt, every mental comparison, every judgmental thought is coming back as evidence of their blindness. While you stand untouchable, undeniable, and fully aligned with who you were always meant to be, you did not just survive the skeptics, you thrived in spite of them. And that reality is a quiet, relentless statement. The world cannot contain the one who was built to rise. So for every chosen one watching this, own your truth, honor your journey, and embrace your power. Let your life continue to speak louder than every doubt cast against you. God bless you.